All right. So thank you, Rene, for sitting down with me.
It's my pleasure.
We just finished day one of our symposium on racial equity, and I appreciate you and your organization. I mean, you're representing Children's Home Society, and you were a sponsor. Can you tell me a little bit about what made you all want to partner with us on this racial equity kind of journey?
Well, I think it's because we just see how outcomes continue to be poor for families of color. We're very, our vision and our mission, and we have is very clear. But even more importantly, we have a major goal, which is to end foster care as we know it.
Wow.
And as we talked, which is very ambitious, but that's never stopped us before. And as today has progressed, I think that some of the things that really hit home was the discussion of maybe, we can't just fix a very broken system. That we need to be bold and that we need to do things that really just turn things up on its head and perhaps just start all over again. I was really impressed with the whole notion of that, a reminder to me as a white woman that this system was developed by people who are white predominantly from the beginning and who never thought about, okay, how is the system going to work if my children have an abuse? That just really, really hit home. And that tells us a lot about why this system is so broken and why there's so much racial disparity.
Agreed. I thought the same thing when Corey said, if something happened in my family and my kid needed to, be taken care of by someone, I wouldn't want my kid in this system. And it struck a chord with me.
Yes.
That we were working in a system that we wouldn't trust with our own children. And
exactly.
That's scary.
It is scary.
Because I think the last thing I read was over 400,000 kids are in foster care on a given day. And that's sad if we don't trust that foster care is equipping them, building them, healing them.
Yes, yes.
It's usually doing the reverse.
Yes.
Wow. So that's also one of my takeaways. Sure. I'm going to start by talking about a strategy that is being used in New York. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's called blind removals.
No.
And I was able to do research and evaluate the effectiveness of that program when I used to work in New York. And what they do is before a child is removed, the caseworker comes into a room quite like this, and they sit around a table with upper level people, directors, supervisors, people that aren't directly connected to the case.
Mm-hmm.
The caseworker presents the family history that's relevant, what happened, what made us have to go to the house, family strength, but they never mention ethnicity, race, where they live, language barriers. It's all blinded.
Wow.
And the group comes to a consensus on removal or not.
Mm-hmm.
So in this county in New York, they can't remove a child until this group essentially says, yes, we need to remove them without knowing their race and ethnicity.
Wow. So
and
it's not
they were
left
able
up to the individual.
And it's not left up to implicit bias,
Yeah.
So they were able to almost cut in half the number of Black and brown kids going into foster care. So to me, equity looks like the same decision-making lens that we have is for every case we see.
Okay.
Like you talked about today, I think many talked about the Department of Juvenile Justice when they look at perhaps a teenage, white kid and a teenage Black kid who've done essentially the same crime. They have different outcomes, and it's how can you explain that besides the color of their skin?
Yes.
And that's what made this city in New York say, we're going to blind this process because this mom came in with drug abuse and a history of domestic violence. And this mom came in with drug abuse and a history of domestic violence, and they deserve the same decision-making protocol.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, equity is the lens we use to decide things. It's not going to be infiltrated or permeated by our own personal bias or stereotypes.
Wow. That's very, very useful to think of that in those terms.
hmm And Corey and I mean, I respect Corey so much, and we talk a lot about our differing perspectives because,
Yes, because that was brought up
absolutely.
today.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I appreciate about the symposium is the speakers that I asked to come here, they don't have to believe what I believe. They don't have
Yes.
to agree with what I,
Yes.
my perspective on things. So I appreciate that Corey says, we don't need to blind processes. You need to look me in my eyes and make the right choice.
Yes.
But Renee, I don't think that people are always able to do that.
No.
I believe that implicit bias is essentially involuntary and unconscious. And there's going to be something that clicks and says that child's in danger simply because his mom's Black,
Yes.
simply because his mom is Native American. So
I know. Sometimes I wonder about that too. Are we just hardwired that way? And you see ebbs and you see changes over time, over many, many years of certain groups that are marginalized, and and then you have a period of enlightenment, and then it comes back again. It's just it can be discouraging.
Yeah,
but
it can be. But I respect his work and the work he's doing in Broward, where they are looking at things without blinders. And I think that it depends on the area of the country. It depends on the individual. I mean, they're making waves in South Florida
Yes.
with the blinders off. They're looking at families and they're saying, we see you. And we're not going to separate your family simply because of the color of your skin. We're gonna hear your story, and we're gonna meet you where you are. But I don't think everyone's going to do that.
No. Well, and that brings me, can I ask another
Absolutely.
question? So that kind of brings me to one question I had for you. What would you recommend as far as training and coaching? Are there any best practices out there along those lines to help decrease bias and discrimination in the workforce?
So I will have to say that when I did my research, I asked this question. So I talked to caseworkers, supervisors, directors, and I said, what made the shift? Because their workforce started to think about implicit bias, and they named 2 trainings. One of them is happening tomorrow, Racial Equity Learning Exchange with Khatib Wahid. The second training, they said, was Bridges Out of Poverty.
I've heard of that.
By Denise Schaller. And I'm not sure if she's still training, but I'm sure her curriculum is, somewhere accessible. So those 2 trainings in my research emerged as just transformative when it came to bringing more awareness and mobilizing people to want to do things differently.
Wow, great. I'm going to have to write those down.
Definitely. Well, I don't have any more questions, but again, I just want to thank you, and just since we're getting recorded, thank you, CHS, for partnering on this journey.
Well, thank you, FSU, my alma mater.
Yes, we're both, social workers from Florida State, and sitting in my seat.
Only the best.
Only the best. Go Noles. Sitting in my seat, I used to be on the front lines of child welfare. I am an African-American woman. I believe that it's not always easy to say, we're going to talk about racial equity. We're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about poverty and how we're disproportionately, represented even in the poverty numbers. But to see that 5 other agencies said, we're going to partner with you, I was overwhelmed and blown away, and I am very appreciative.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure.